to this. This is Murph, and this is Jon. This is so good. I know. It's okay. Well, it's because we immediately, as soon as I clicked start stream, Troy went turn around very loudly, and it threw off my whole... Stop! We're literally streaming! You threw off my whole vibe.
The Emperor's Groove!
I know. Anyway, this is What's in the Dungeon with your hosts, Tweedledee and Tweedledumbass. And it's up to you to figure out which one is the dumbass.
I just want to put that out there. I am the dumbass.
It's interactive. It's very interactive.
To choose your own dumbass adventure.
Yeah. This is the podcast that we do weekly now, 2 weeks in a row, coming to you live from the studio in Boston. That's where we're at, if you can't tell from our production quality.
Live from Boston?
Live from, I guess Murph is in the nether, and I'm...
again, this is the second time, okay? Talking about dungeons, I get excited, and yes. I am in a cave, and where the fuck are you?
I'm in my own dungeon, a mental dungeon. One I cannot ever hope to escape.
A mental dungeon.
A mental dungeon.
I'm trapped in a delusion of grandeur, and that itself is its own prison.
It is, indeed. This is the podcast we do every Wednesday, where we discuss D&D related things, questions, comments, concerns. Maybe sometimes we go on a rant about random nonsense, too, because that did happen last time a couple times. But no one will know, because
Dungeons and Dragons podcast. Yes. But we are not exclusive to that because fuck you, it's our podcast. We will talk about what we wish to talk about.
It is, yeah. I'm sorry if you're viewing this and you're really wanting it to be strictly Dungeons and Dragons, it's going to be whatever the fuck we want to talk about. But mainly Dungeons and Dragons. This time we've got a list of questions which should really help keep things on track.
Today's episode actually has a theme. And I don't know if you put what today's theme was in the episode title or not, but
Murph, goddammit, I wish you had said that before.
That's my fault. You can change it.
I can, yeah. Let me see.
This is the episode about what is a character. What is a character sheet? What goes into making a character? This is a character important, I guess you could say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, if anybody remembers from last time, I actually left the episode on a question that led into today's episode. And that question is... Jon, what, in your opinion, is the worst character class and race to start in D&D as a newbie?
Yeah, that's
what is just the worst, most absolute asinine? Like, why did you do this to yourself?
Well, I think that's a two. You kind of got to bifurcate that question because there's two aspects to D&D. There's the technical side, and then there's the role-playing side, right? You've got the rules, the regulations, the world that the DM has created within its own mechanics, and then you've got I've got to put my hands out here. You've got the realm of fantasy that involves whatever the mind can imagine. So I gave this all of 10 seconds of thought just now, actually. Okay. I prepped very heavily for this. My secretary gave me the list, and I went over it. So the worst character class and race, this assumes that there is one, and I don't necessarily think there is one. I think if you're dedicated enough to playing D&D, you'll figure out what you need to figure out. But this is assuming worst case scenario, you're like the worst D&D player, and you're not really bought in, and you really hate everyone, and this is the worst. So the worst class is easy. The worst class is going to be really any class that requires spellcasting, specifically wizard. Wizard is probably one of the most complicated, weirdest classes.
Am I also going to find out that you just hate wizards?
No, look, every game I have ever played, I have played a wizard. I've really tried playing other classes, but out of the you can't fucking play wizard. I own them. I am the fucking wizard king. Don't fuck around with me. Yeah. No, it's just because it's so any spellcasting class is instantly slightly more complicated because you don't just whack, you don't just talk, you also have magic. You have to do the hand motion when you say that. Ooh, excuse me. So it's a little bit more difficult because you have this whole mechanic of magic, which is in and of itself a complication. It's a little bit ridiculous. Then with the wizard, you have added to that the fact that they don't just have a list of spells; they have a spell book. So like if you look at cleric, druid, and sorcerer, and to some extent warlock, and the other spellcasting classes, you've really got an easier set because you get given a list of spells that you can just use, and that's really it. You have prepared spells, you have like amount of spell slots, but with wizard you also have the added complication of a spell book where you have spells written down that you can change out at certain levels, that you can fiddle around with during long rests. You can change them out, and it's just very hard for a newbie coming in to play a spellcasting class, just because it adds spell slots. A lot of people don't understand what a spell slot is, and it takes probably about 30 minutes to explain it to someone who has no concept of D&D. So usually those are, in terms of complication and mechanics, a wizard, maybe a sorcerer is one of the more difficult, worst classes to play as a newbie, because it's like jumping in head first, and it's just difficult to try and figure all that shit out, especially if you don't have a good DM, if you don't have a good group that can help shepherd you along. As far as like on the role-playing side, the worst class is, and this is only because, and we'll get into a little bit of this later with the metagaming question, but it's almost become a meme now of people wanting to play bards to fuck up their DM. Because the bard is one of the, it's a hybrid class.
To fuck up their DM, or to fuck everything that their DM puts in front of them?
Both, all of it. Because the bard is a hybrid class. It gets melee. It gets a good, not like super strong, but it has a good melee and it has good spells. And it's one of the few non sort of full spell casting classes to get the wish spell. And it's also got a pretty wide palette of spells. If you look at the wizard doesn't have any healing spells. The best they get is like false life, which gives them temporary hit points, but they have no healing spells. Same to some extent with sorcerer. There's some subclasses that give them to you. But the bard has a good mix of offensive, defensive, and healing spells all combined into one. And they've also get a lot of role-playing sort of perks. They get double proficiency in some things. They get jack of all trades, which really makes it difficult for them to fail certain checks. So when we look at like the character sheet and we go more into detail about what each thing means, basically the bard, if you really want to metagame and you want to play it to a way that's annoying, you can really fuck shit up just by never being able to fail ability rolls, never being able to fail checks, never being able to fail saves, because like you can min-max the shit out of a bard and just really be annoying with it. So that's like role-playing wise, it's not by any means the worst, but it can be the worst, because you've got somebody has posted in the chat, barbarian is the best. So that's something.
Oh, welcome to the podcast. And
yes.
Hey, barbarian is the best.
So when you got someone who's just not a good player, and someone who's just like coming into it like, oh, I'm gonna make the DM wish he never played with me, like, oh, I'm gonna break all the rules, I'm gonna break the game. Bard is usually what people go for, because they've seen all the Reddit threads and the memes about the bards doing stupid, crazy nonsense. But again, the worst character class and race question assumes that you're a bad player. Like you're not, or you're playing in a bad group, because there's never really going to be a worst one if you've got a group that's supportive and can get you through the initial hurdle. As far as race is, so they expanded a lot on this in the newest book. They've got the new book, the Mordenkainen's Monsters of the Multiverse, which replaced Mordenkainen's Tome of Monsters as the sort of big book of monsters. Yeah,
because the reason I asked this question is less of like which one is harder to role play, but necessarily I know that like each race has specific racial abilities.
Yeah.
And has like certain benefits. So like again, as I did last week, and this will probably happen until you tell me to stop doing it, I always compare it to the sources of material that I know.
Yeah.
And again, I compare everything to the Elder Scrolls, because
yeah.
that's the closest thing that I have. So like dark elves have like the high call power. Like wood elves have like the forest sight, so they have the ability to use like specific, so like everything has like a racial ability that can push it over the edge. But like there could be the one I hear all the time, and I could be doing completely wrong, but again, noob here, so correct me.
Yeah.
Tabaxi race is like an interesting, like them and like halfling.
Yeah,
like,
so Tabaxi is the cat race, and they've got
the Khajiit of the D&D.
Yes, to some extent. They have a few interesting things. They've got Cat's Claws, which give them an unarmed attack. They've got Cat's Talents, Dark Vision, and Agility, which all kind of really play into their roguish sort of outlook on life. But the thing about the races, like they released a new book, and in that new book they tried to get away from. They always had in the old version what was called monstrous races. It was races you could play as an as a player character, but they were like, ooh, you might have a difficult time because it's an orc and orcs are kind of shunned, or it's a furbolg and furbolgs are scary, like all this other stuff. So they got away from that kind of language because they wanted more people to be open to playing other races, because it gets kind of boring with your elf, dwarf, human, elf, dwarf, human, elf, dwarf, human. Like maybe gnome.
All 5 people playing the same.
Exactly.
Again, like we touched on this subject as well last week. Because there are certain races in the D&D universe that people started associating with
certain
real
stereotypical outlooks on certain
like
races, which was very reductive and very stupid.
Changing and opening that up.
Yeah.
It takes the stereotype out of things that we subconsciously put into stuff.
Definitely.
Because of just similarities. So.
And so when you look at all the different races, they've got now probably 20-something different races. I'm just scrolling through the list on D&D Beyond. You've got, we'll just pull Tabaxi, and I can explain a little bit about that.
I always see the meme about the thick horsewomen.
So they've got feline agility, which when you move on your turn in combat, you can double your speed, which is pretty great. Because their speed is 30, so you get an instant 60 feet. Their cat's claws give you a climbing speed of 20 feet, and you can make unarmed strikes for 1d4 plus your strength, which is great. And then cat's talent gives you proficiency in perception and stealth skills. So Tabaxi is like a really good class, but really only if you're going for a sneaky rogue type. Like if you're trying to play like a scholarly wizard, it's more of a flavor choice. It's like, okay, well, I have these things, but I'm probably never going to use them. They're helpful to have. And that kind of, if you ever played Warcraft or World of Warcraft, you like had all the Goliath rogue would be dope. It would be, yeah. If you ever played World of Warcraft, you had like the different racial abilities, but they were never like anything to write home about. Like some of them like broke you of crowd control. Some of them gave you extra haste. Some of them, and that's kind of what D&D's done is with these races. They don't really top one over the other in terms of like, unless you're really specifically getting into the min-max shit of how in the world can I play this game the most efficiently. And even then you have to define what efficiently means to you. Does it mean you can kill everything or talk your way out of everything or hide from everything?
Again, though, that comes back into the idea, though, is like, are racial abilities kind of shoehorning you into a specific class in some cases, like to use them effectively? Because again, as we were talking about with Tabaxi, like you'd be like, well, I think it'd be cool to play a, Tabaxi warrior.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, well, yeah, you could.
Yeah.
But like, is that really going to be effectively used as better than you could for the standard rogue with this character with the...
Yeah, there's always going to be a little bit of bias, just because they try really hard to get out of the archetypical fantasy settings, like, oh, the dwarf is the barbarian or the Goliath, and the elf is the wizard or the archer, and the human is the rogue or the warrior. Like, they try to get away from that and give you a little bit of room, but there's always going to be more of a bias in certain races to be attracted to other classes, and I think they play into that more based on like the culture, like the Tabaxi. Generally, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. No, it's just like, see, that's where the problem comes in, though, right? Because like we could use that same expression on anything, though. Like if you were like, oh, well, why are humans, drunkard, barbarian type, or just like snooty noble type? Well, it's their culture. Well, is it though? Because like if Tabaxi's like, again, comparing this back to the Khajiit, Khajiit is sand-dwelling merchant types. Yeah, that is their culture. But then that automatically has them, and especially Skyrim, completely subjugated against in terms of being considered thieves, because that's their whole cultural background, which is kind of problematic within itself. Yeah. So that's where some questions come in. Is it's like, do you have to play?
No, but by no means. And I think that again, this goes back to what I said in the last episode, where if you've got a good demon, if you've got a good group, they'll let you have a lot of leeway with this. Like there's ways to change out racial features on your character sheet. Like you can very easily just swap stuff out if you want to, and maybe you are a tabaxi, but maybe you were abandoned at birth and raised in a monastery, so you would have different skills than a normal tabaxi. And they provide you with lists of being able to find those and attribute those to your character. You can't do it easily on D&D Beyond like digitally, but you can certainly write that in your sheet. But for the written word, they definitely typecast a lot of the races into very specific set paths.
The most progressive, unprogressive.
Yeah, it's a little bit interesting because like you look at like let's take they try to get away from it. Like the Hobgoblin I'm looking at right now. The Hobgoblin character race, the picture they have is of a Hobgoblin bard, which is cool because like this is not something you think of a Hobgoblin, and they've given them a lot of good racial traits that kind of reflect that they could do different things as a Hobgoblin that you wouldn't expect. But this Hobgoblin is different than the one that was in. They didn't even have it in there. What am I looking at?
They went from like a cave dweller,
yes,
creepy loincloth wearing to like a fully suited.
Yeah, so in Volo's Guide to Monsters, which is the old one, they had the Hobgoblin, which had Constitution and Intelligence, Martial Training, and Saving Face. Saving Face was if you failed and you were in front of people, you could roll again to try and succeed on certain checks, I believe. The new version has, they're Goblinoid, so they get certain perks from that. They have Fey Ancestry, so they can't be charmed or put to sleep. They have Fey Gift, and they have the Fortune from the Many. So they've already changed the wording to be more like sort of open and able to like open to interpretation and stuff.
With that more magical creature instead of like
purely evil. It's
like in again cave dwelling booger goblin thing. Like, it's not
definitely. So they've made a lot of progress in shifting like the bias against playing these races, because like you could have always played a full-blooded orc in the game before this book came out, but it was always like, do I want to be a bloodthirsty killer? Well, now you don't necessarily have to embody those traits because they don't have that tint. Like certainly they're a little bit more primal as a race in D&D just because of where they're at in the region, but it's a lot less. Well, I have to be evil because I'm playing an orc, or I have to be evil because I'm playing a drow, a dark elf. But when it comes to the most difficult or maybe the worst class to play, I'm gonna say it's probably a Kenku, which is the Raven people, and the only reason is because they're very like with Tabaxi being shoehorned into being a rogue. A Kenku is almost guaranteed you have to be a rogue because they have a very specific racial trait where they cannot speak unless they've heard the thing that they're trying to speak. Like they the lore is they were worshippers of the Queen of the Shadowfell, whose name I cannot remember, and something went wrong and they lost some type of bargain, I believe. Let me not talk out of my ass.
So wait a second. So when you say they can't talk unless they've heard the thing, so you're saying
like
a normal
they have
Raven
a mimicry.
Like they can learn. Okay, but do they understand what they're saying, or are they just responding as a normal Raven would, which is just by instinct? Like so if I'm like, hey, they're like soup, and you're like, okay.
So
like they think they're responding.
What you're the Kenku is sentient, like they can speak, or they can think for themselves. They're not like an actual bird. Right. But when they speak, they can only it's called mimicry. They can only mimic sounds they've heard, including voices, and they can understand common, but they can only speak using that mimicry trait. So they can only ever say things that they've heard other people say, and it is repeated back in that person's voice, not the Kenku's actual voice.
So they're like okay, so it's like an echo trait where they can only repeat. Okay, so let me ask this in that sense, without becoming again into a question that will come up later, like metagaming. Does that typically, for like you as a DM, if they're playing that character, can they only repeat responses that they've heard during that session? Or can they be like, oh, well, this one time there was a market trader and I heard him say this specific line, and so that's, how do you keep that from just being them? They can talk,
and it's really hard to be honest, because there's a level where I don't want to gimp the player and of not being able to speak, but I also don't want to sit down for 6 hours a day trying to figure out what they would have heard and would not have heard in their entire life, which is why playing a Kenku is just very difficult. So the one time I had someone play Kenku, I basically allowed kind of it was like a basic intelligence check to see if they remembered hearing something before, and if it was a 10 check or greater. If they passed, they could say the thing in someone else's voice, but they had to give me like a real story about it. And if they failed, it was like, well, no, you don't know that. But it really stopped and started the game like really badly.
That would be kind of like having like an e-brake on your car.
Yeah, like because every conversation, every conversation that had to take place would be immediate. Okay, pause. Okay, gotta roll. Okay, I can say 3 words. Okay, pause. Hold on. Okay, I can say another 5 words. Like it's.
So could you not? I mean, and again, I know this kind of defeats the purpose of it, but could you not, in that sense, like, is there a magical item that could have assisted?
No, because this is a racial trait. Like you can eventually you could pick a class and get telepathy and be able to like project your thoughts, but even then you can only do that to certain creatures, and it's a lot more complicated than it should be. But there's not
like a parchment that speaks if I write on it or something.
No, I mean you could make something like that up, but even then you would have to like take the time to write that shit down and figure out what you're deciding. So it's not game breaking, and it's not by any means horrible, but it's difficult to play this race.
Sounds more like a race that you would use as an NPC than you would like an actual character, because like they'd be wonderful for storytelling purposes, but it's like, but you're the DM, so you would know within the lore of that character how to.
And then I feel bad because anyone who plays a Kinku or has wanted to play a Kinku, they generally feel like they have to sit on the sidelines and not talk as much because they're going to hold up the conversation. So they immediately become the quiet brooding type. And generally, if you're quiet in a session, you're uninterested. And people pick up on that, and they pick up on that in a bad way generally. So I have seen people play Kinkus very well, and I've seen DMs that have been able to handle it really well. It's just if you're a newbie, going for Kinku is probably. It's going to be difficult. You're going to have to spend a lot of time working with your DM to figure shit out. You're going to have to spend a lot of time working on your backstory and on your own, like, role-playing skills to be able to pull off this Raven person. Because, like, the whole background of the Kinku is that the reason they can't talk is because they were cursed. They used to be able to fly and talk, but they tried to, like, backstab their master, who no one really knows who it was, and the entity they worshipped cursed them by removing their wings, and they ripped the creativity from their soul. So like they can't have original thoughts, and then they also took away their voices. So it's really kind of just an edgy race to pick, first of all, because it's like, dang, they can't really do anything. And also because of that, like they've got so their traits, which let's see here. Their traits are expert duplication, recall, and mimicry. Those lend them. So the expert duplication is like a forgery thing where you can like, if you've seen something, you can pass a check to recall it and be able to copy it. Recall is you have pretty good memory, and mimicry is the thing we talked about earlier. So you can generally get pushed towards a rogue with a Kinku. Because you're kind of a sneaky mimic people's voices.
That's so funny because you stated the fact that they can't have an original thought. So it's like, how would they? It'd be like, we need a creative way to get into this. Let's ask the rogue.
And
the rogue's like,
that's not a specific trait. That's more the background of their race. So like, I would
have
never
they evolved past that, or is it like,
yeah, to some extent,
the most boring fucking person you've ever talked to?
but like literally,
tell a joke. You can't.
Literally, the curse was they had the creativity stripped from their souls. So it's like, okay, well, what does that even fucking mean? D&D.
Yeah, that sounds like a
how do I play this character?
Like, because, like, that's either the most intense punishment or not at all. Because, like, they're like, well, we just steal everybody else's ideas now. But it's like, but how would you know? Because you can't have an original thought. You don't know if if it's not original.
It's horrible, thought. And I'm not a fan of a Kinku. Like, I would never want to play one because I'm just not that good at playing the game. And I would be.
It sounds again like a fantastic class, or I say class. It's a fantastic race to flavor up a story.
Yeah.
Because meeting one would be like, and I hate to use this because people use this in real life too, and it gets kind of, but it's an exotic, like, race to meet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Especially if you're playing like a group of people from a very rural area, and you're like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
I've never seen this.
And it's also like they're also very They stick to themselves. There's not a lot of them in the world, so like you'd have to come up with a really good reason as to why this one left its flock and why this one is in this random spot where there's no others present.
Isn't there like fish people that are very similar to?
Yeah, Tritons. Tritons are also Tritons were high up on that list too of difficult characters, only because you have to explain why the Triton is not in the ocean.
Yeah, because
it's like, okay,
they have like they were like mass murdered at one point, weren't they? From like another.
No, not the Tritons, not the Tritons. I think you're thinking of the Gith, which have been murdered by the Illithids. The Gith are like
they're like very shut in type creature.
Yeah.
I just know that they're like they're fish type people.
Yeah.
But I just know that they were like heavily destroyed one point by like another type of people.
Yeah.
And now they're like
I think you're talking about the Gith. So the Gith Yankee and the Gith Zerai are two races of Gith. And the Gith were hunted to near extinction by mind flayers, or the Illithids, the tentacle head guys.
Yeah.
And then eventually they broke free from their enslavement, and they've grown in power, and they now hunt Illithids down on their dragons, which is kind of dope. Yeah, if you've ever played Baldur's Gate 3, the new one, the opening scene is of an Illithid hunt by the Gith, which is really cool. Like the opening trailer.
You never hear those guys being like targets to anyone. So
yeah,
the fact
exactly.
that these guys are like sole purpose hunting them is kind of badass.
It's really badass.
He's like a human warrior walking around, just like a cleric. Like everyone's like, "Holy shit!"
Yeah, but really,
dudes flying over attacking him.
But caveat to all of that is to say, it's a game to have fun with. So there's not really a worst one. It's just these are the most difficult I could imagine to play. Any of the monstrous races to start off are going to be difficult because they're not us. They're rarer races. You're not as familiar with them because they're not the standard Tolkien fantasy races or, whatever popular culture fantasy references So it's going to be difficult to kind of...
fantasy, so we're not...
Yeah, and I think that like I had a very good experience. I played a Furbolg for my longest campaign as a character, which is not a common race. They're large sort of fey creatures that are more woodland related, but I played mine as a necromancer wizard. Which was like completely against what a normal Furbolg would be, but I had like a good background and everything. And that was, I played that character from 1 to 20 and had a really good time playing him. I was definitely more on the neutral evil spectrum as a Furbolg, which was interesting to play. But it's not undoable. It's just more difficult because you're not super familiar. Like I didn't know what a Furbolg was until I got this was years ago when the new book came out. I was like, oh, I want to pick a new race. Furbolg looks cool. They're tall and live long and have magic. So let me go with that. That was really always looking at. And it was fun to deal with. But at the same time, starting off, I definitely started with a human. 100%. My first character was a human wizard.
Like, although humans aren't the same humans that we are.
Yeah.
You can, like, as a new player, it's probably the easiest one to step into because it's the closest to us. So, like, what you think, what you do, how you react to things are more natural because you are a human and you would know what a human would do.
And humans have the easiest racial trait, which is they get a +1 to all their ability scores and an extra language. That's literally it. And it's a good racial trait, that +1 to all ability scores, but it's a lot less thinking. Like a lot of these other races have very specific, like Goliath, for example, has Stone's Endurance, which is a really great racial feature where once per long rest, you can roll a d12 and reduce damage by the number rolled plus your con modifier. But if you forget that, which a lot of people do because it's a racial feature. It's not a spell. It's not an attack. It's just a racial feature you get at the very beginning of the game. If you forget that, it's kind of like, whatever. So at least with human and with the other races that don't have very specific features like that, they're a lot easier to play because you don't feel bad about forgetting stuff. And that's why a lot of people have issue with spellcasters because they forget. They go, oh, crap, I had this spell out of 20 I could have used for this specific instance.
Well, again, you're not living the life 100% of the time, so these kind of things are going to slip away from
exactly.
you. So if it was actual life, you'd be like, oh, shit, look at all this stuff. I have a book. So let's go ahead and get into these questions for today. So with today's topic, as it was, although we've just spent 30 minutes answering the first question.
That's okay. I think that was a big one. We can breeze right through these. What is a character sheet? It's a sheet
today's episode, which is what is a character? What is a character sheet? What goes into a backstory? Like these are all the things that a lot of people want. So like as what we do at the beginning of a D&D session, or I would assume, we're gonna start the episodes here. This is welcome to D&D. Thanks for joining us.
Yes.
So you want to play? Let's get your character created.
Yeah.
So walk me through, what is a character sheet?
A character sheet is a sheet on which you have your character, Murph. Next question.
Thank you.
That was easy, right? I think that was probably the easiest.
Thank you for explaining. We don't have like a physical diagram that we could pull up, do we? Like an image of one.
Yeah, let me actually do that right now. I can do that for sure.
You like wave your mouse around, like this point means that we're doing this and that. And then obviously, like, we could go, like, maybe later on the YouTube channel we can do a segment like that's not podcast, but like just for, like a reference guide, and we can go more in depth, because we're not going to spend the 3.5 hours we could probably do on what a character sheet actually is and like who made it and like blah 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 blah. We can do that later. This is just a introduction, the same way that you would give to any new player to kind of get them up and going.
Yes. So a character sheet, I'm just going to pull up a Google image because that's the easiest way. And let me see. Can I want to know, we're here for a TED Talk about that character. Oh, it's just silliness. Can I post it in the chat? Nah, that probably wouldn't be the best.
Yeah. I mean, you could, and then it should pop up to where, like, do you have the chat open on the side of your Discord?
Yes, I have a separate,
You should be able to see it. If you need to send it to me, I could be able to open it on my OBS and have it like floating next to my head.
Well, I can actually put it in the Twitch chat. Should I put it in the Twitch chat? Screen share?
I don't know if it's gonna pop. I mean, do whatever you think is gonna work. I just don't know if it's gonna pop up to.
That's true. You know what? I can just switch what we're viewing. I think.
Yeah. I mean, if you just want to pull it up as a individual thing.
Let's see. I'm gonna change the capture on Twitch Studio to this.
It just breaks. Everything falls apart.
No, I think it worked. Did it work?
Oh yeah, it did work. Yeah, we're on Google Images.
Okay. Oh, that's definitely not what I meant to do. So this is a character sheet here. We're gonna actually quickly do something. Let's see. We're gonna hide my bookmarks bar so no one sees all my private information about my Hulu account. So this is a character sheet. I've got this one up on the right side. Let me put the Twitch chat over here. So at the top, you've got your name, your class and level, your background, your player name, your race, your alignment, your experience points, etc. Very basic things. Yeah. So there's a few other ones. Like if we look here, this is one that's been filled out. But we won't look at that. There's this one which is a little bit hard to read because the font's horrible. This one down here has like paintings and stuff. That's crazy. This is a very basic one.
Pro done. That's like when you go on Fiverr and get like an artist.
Yeah, that's like a craziness.
What is the tie-dye one? What is the purple My Little Pony looking?
I don't even know, bro. This is crazy. That's insane. Yeah, so this is what it's become. I'm just gonna get really distracted by all this stuff. This is one that someone wrote in, it looks like. Where was that one that's filled out? This is a good one to look at. Actually, no, it's not. I don't like that font.
I like that one because it looks like it came right out of the sheet. It's it's like if you had a perforated page in the back of the D&D handbook, like a beginner's guide, and it's just blank character sheets you can fill in.
Yes. So we'll stick with this one because it's empty. So up at the top, you've got your character name, all that stuff. And then it kind of flows downward from there. When you create your character, always you want to pull out the player's handbook, and in like the first chapter, it tells you every step you need to do to create a character. And it's a little bit of a long process, but it's rewarding and fun. Basically, you want to go into this with some idea of what you want your character to look like. You should have an image in your head or a subtype in your head of what you want your person to be, because that's what you're going to do. Like you're literally just creating yourself, your ideal self or your worst, or whatever you want to do. It's fantasy. It doesn't matter. But that'll help you decide on a class and race. Like, do you want to be a human wizard? Do you want to be a tabaxi monk? Like, what's going on? What do you want to do? And you figure that out first. Then you've got your all your different skills. And these are like the mechanics of the game. Right here on this left-hand side, these are mostly mechanics. You've got your 6 ability scores: strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. Those are usually abbreviated for the first 3 letters, just to make it easier. And those feed into your saving throws and your skills. So if you've got a... let's see if we can find a completed one. That would probably be a little bit easier. This one. So, actually, no, I don't like that one. That one's a bit of a weird look. This one's good. So if you see, there's the big plus number and then the little number. The little number is always bigger because that's the base modifier. So every 2 numbers of the little number, the big plus goes up by 1. So a 9 to 10 is plus 0. An 11 to 12 is plus 1. 13 to 14 is plus 2, and so on until it gets to 20, which is a plus 5.
Okay.
And you also have minuses. So they've got an 8 here in intelligence. That's minus 1. 7 to 8 is minus 1. 6 to or 5 to 6 is
that's
minus
whatever you roll, and then
Yes.
immediately a minus
So-
1
so
to whatever you roll.
You've got a few ways to determine these scores when you start with your character. You can either do a point buy system where you get a predetermined amount of points that you then put into skills, like in a video game. That's normally how video games do it when you play an RPG. They go, here's your skills. You start off at 10 on every one of them, and here's 10 points you can put into them. You can subtract if you want, or you can just put them into whatever you want. I like to do it the other way, which is you roll 4d6s, and you subtract the lowest roll. So if you roll 4d6s and you get like 4 3s, okay, that's 3, 3, 3, 3. So 3 times 4 is 12. Subtract one of those 3s, that's 9. Your score's 9. If that makes sense. And that's
Sort of.
It's
Yeah,
literally
again,
that's the way it's got it outlined in the book a little bit better. But basically, you roll 4d6s and you subtract the lowest number, and that's your little number that goes in the circle. Then what you do is you check your race, because your race is always going to give you certain ability bonuses or minuses depending.
As you stated, with humans getting a +1 across
Exactly.
the board. So you take whatever the small number is, and then you just add a +1 to the larger number.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so it would mean whatever I roll at any point,
Yeah. So
I
like
would then add a +1 to whatever the fuck it was.
yes. So if you rolled a 12 and you were a human, it would actually be a 13.
Right.
And
okay,
the third.
So, and then if you have a modifier of any other thing, so let's say you already have, like, for instance, his dexterity is a +1.
Yeah.
And in this case, I would get an additional +1, so it would be actually +2, not +1.
No. All your modifiers will go to the little number.
Okay,
So,
so
yeah.
so the ones that is like, again, for humans getting a +1,
Yeah.
it doesn't go to the big number, it goes to the small number.
Yeah. Which is
So if I was
confusing
12,
because the small number is actually the bigger number numerically.
Yeah.
Which makes it a little bit confusing to describe to people.
Larger is just like a benefit
Yeah.
number, right?
And-
so it's like if.
And that's just more of a
like
balance
charisma-
thing.
Okay.
Because it makes
yeah.
it easier to influence these scores without ganking your character one way or another. So like if you're, some spells will reduce these by 1 or 2, but they'll never affect the actual plus number directly. They'll always affect the base number down here, which is fine.
Okay, so for instance, let's say your character with like a +2 intelligence, and you take head trauma.
Yes.
So that would reduce the smaller number or
Yes.
the bigger number.
Yeah, it would reduce the smaller number.
Okay,
The little
so
number.
Even if
It would
was a
it would
+2.
Yeah.
I would take like a -3 to intelligence,
which would
because
put
of
it
head
at
trauma.
a 9, so you'd go to
And
a 0.
you'd still get the +2 on top of it because that doesn't get affected.
No. So let me re-explain.
Okay, sorry.
It
This is the part
does.
where I'm trying-
No, you're fine. It doesn't affect it directly, but it does affect it indirectly. So like I said, a 9 to 10 is 0. So like in your scenario, let's say the character in question is a wizard and they've got a 14 intelligence, which is a +3, right?
Okay.
If they take 3 points of intelligence damage, which is not normal, but it can be done, their intelligence would go down to 11, which
means that they'd only get a +1.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So when we affect it, that drops to okay.
Yes,
Because in
it
my
does.
head, and again, this is where I think I was getting confused. The plus number was
Yes.
like a modifier based off of a specific thing.
Yes.
Not just the base number, but like I put on a robe that gives me +1 damage buff.
Yeah.
So like your constitution would go up.
Yeah, no.
+1.
So
But that's not. Nothing affects the plus numbers. It's
no,
always.
it's
affecting
always
the
going to be the
base.
base number. Yeah. So and there's like very cool items in the game that will affect. Like there's tomes that will affect all these things, and they'll tell you that it goes up by 2 or 1 or whatever. It's always the base number.
So it's the base. Okay, so the base number is everything. The plus number is just there to make it easier for you to math the roll.
Yes, because anytime you roll on one of these abilities, you add or subtract the plus or minus. So you don't add 17 charisma, you add +3 charisma.
Okay,
And it's just it's just kind of a stat squish and a bit of an indirect way of making sure nothing gets out of proportion, so you're not rolling 40s and 50s. which would be a little bit complicated.
Because again, you can only go up to a D20 anyway. There's not like a D75 or some crap. So
there is a D100, but that's not really used all that much.
How in the fuck does that
it's
has to be digital?
It's a percentile dice. It's a percentile dice. You roll a D100 and a D10. So the D10 is 0 through 9, and then the D100 is 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, all the way to 100.
Okay, so it's a 10-sided die, but it's in multiples of 10.
Yeah, there's 2 10-sided dice.
It's not like 100.
No. There is one. There is a 100-sided dice that they make, and it's about this big, and it's very hard to land because all of the faces are like that big.
You've got basically multi-points, and you can't really figure out what side's up.
It's unusable, really.
But digitally would be the only way.
Yeah. So ability scores are already kind of complicated, but then you look at saving throws and skills over here. So saving throws and skills, the way I explain this to make it a little bit easier is a saving throw is whenever something is doing something to you. So like if my character is getting enchanted by an evil sorceress, he might have to roll a charisma saving throw. And so I would, if I were this character, I would roll a +6. Or maybe I have to dodge out of the way of a fireball. That would be a dexterity saving throw.
You would roll a D20.
A D20.
So you roll a D20. It lands on a 7, and then you would take whatever the plus number is for your charisma, and then add that, and then that check has to be higher than whatever they rolled for completion. Yeah. Okay, see, that part makes sense for those of you that are following along, if that makes sense to you. Yeah,
so generally, there's not competing rolls. Generally, it's just a check that the DM has. So like,
you've already rolled to see, the DM has already rolled for, or just done
there's no
action.
Roll. There's no roll for opposing a saving throw unless it specifically says, like in a strength contest when you're grappling someone. Like if I throw a fireball, like if I'm a wizard and I throw a fireball at someone, I don't roll. The enemy rolls to dodge out of the way because I've already thrown the fireball. It's gonna go somewhere.
If it lands, you roll damage, but you're doing the action. There's no chance of it. Not doing
you're casting fireball. The enemy is trying to duck out of the way. If they succeed, they take half damage. If they don't succeed the check, then they take full damage, is how Fireball works specifically. Because it's got an explosive radius you can't really duck out of. You're going to get singed. But there's no opposing roll from the person who cast the Fireball. In that instance, sometimes there is. It's all dependent on the spell. But in this instance, there's not. And then if you get out of saving throws, you go right down, you see skills. Skills are things when the character tries to do something. So 5e did really well with these, I think, in breaking down everything you would do in the world into these skills. There's always going to be a gray area, and we'll go into each one. But if you look, and it's kind of small print, each one of these has a name, and then each one of these has a smaller word in parentheses. And that's the modifier it pulls from. So if you look at the first one, acrobatics. Acrobatics is a -1. Small next to it, or +1, sorry. Small next to it is dex in parentheses. That's because your acrobatic skill is tied to your dexterity modifier. Animal handling is tied to your wisdom modifier. Arcana is tied to your intelligence. Athletics is tied to strength.
So it shows you which ones are needed for specifically those feats. So, like for instance, your I don't know, your strength would be slash or something. I don't know. I can't see it well enough on the 1080p. The stream to read it. But like each one is attributed. So like medicine, I assume, would be part of intelligence.
Yes, medicine is part of actually wisdom, not intelligence.
Okay, wisdom. So, like for instance, like if you had a +2 to medicine, then that would be based off of whatever you would roll for an intelligence check for medicine. I guess is how that would work.
I don't know what I just clicked there. Can I click this link
Google
and it take us to a
searched specifically for? Yeah, sorry, I'm looking at it on the stream, but it's in 1080p on a 4K screen, so it's just very small.
This might be slightly better. So we changed characters here. This is
better. Holy crap! I can actually see now.
So the reason they did this. So you might ask, if acrobatics is dexterity, why don't I just roll dexterity? Because 5th edition introduced something called proficiency. Your proficiency bonus, if you look at the top here. Your proficiency bonus is always a plus, and it's always going to be tied directly to your level. And basically what a proficiency bonus is, it's an indicator of your continued training and skill in anything you're already good at. So at, I think, it goes up every few levels by +1. So you start off with a proficiency bonus of +2. I think at 5th level or 4th level it goes to +3, and then it continues on until you get to level 20, and it's like a +5 or 6. Or maybe 7, I can't remember. But so the point of this proficiency bonus is, if you look on this skill set and on the saving throw list, there's certain circles that are bubbled in. That's what he's proficient in. This Maghar orc is proficient in strength saving throws and constitution saving throws. So he adds his proficiency bonus to those numbers. So that's why his strength saving throw is not a +4, it's a +7, because he takes the 4 and adds the 3 and gets the 7.
Shorthand math showing you what you would automatically.
Yes.
You don't have to sit there and go, oh, I'm at this plus
Yes.
this.
It's an easier way of handling that. And it's a way of showing what your character might be skilled in beyond the normal level. So like if you look at the skills, this orc has put proficiency bonuses in animal handling, athletics, intimidation, persuasion, and survival. So, you know, he's going for your classic warrior build really with this. He's taken a little bit of a weird one with animal handling, but that's fine. He's got athletics, intimidation, persuasion, and survival. So in any one of those situations, he's going to get... He's being a little bit loud. You're gonna get a higher level of success rate because you've trained, quote unquote, in those skills, and that's all a proficiency bonus is. And your proficiency bonus gets added to a lot of things beyond just this stuff. It gets added to your attacks, to your spell rolls, to really anything you're good at. You're gonna take your proficiency bonus in. Now, if you look down here, you see your passive perception or passive wisdom. This is just your perception. And what that means is anyone who's trying to stealth past you, like any of my NPCs that I would be controlling, they have to roll an 11 or higher for you not to notice them. So the higher this number, the more perceptive you are. And they kind of took this down and put it here. That way characters would be aware of what their passive perception is without having to take the wisdom modifier of 10 and adding the +1 perception to it to get the number. That's just an easy way.
How do you get that perception check?
It's 10 plus your perception.
Okay, so 10 plus, and then there's a perception skill.
Yes,
okay,
so +1.
So he had is it naturally a +1, or did that character sheet specifically add 1 point to perception?
So if you look, the reason the perception is +1 is because his wisdom is a +1.
Okay, so it's just an automatic modifier of +1 because he has a 13 in wisdom.
Absolutely.
Okay.
If he had taken a proficiency in perception, it would be a +4, and his passive wisdom would be a 14. But he did not, so it stays the same. And if you look down here in this proficiencies and languages, they actually wrote out what they're proficient in. That way you can kind of track it. He's proficient in athletics, constitution saving throws. Those come from his race, like his racial trait of being an orc. He gets those. He has heavy armor, light armor, martial weapons, medium armor. So these are items and, they're weapons and armor. If you can always wield whatever weapon you want. You can always carry whatever armor you want. But if you are not proficient in them, you will not gain their bonuses.
Okay. So it's the difference between like the comparison's another way where it's like you can so like Elden Ring. We've both played Elden Ring. Yeah. It's the instance of like you have a two-handed weapon that's outside of your strength range. Like, yes, you can absolutely use this all day, but you're not going to get the proficiency of that weapon because you are not the
You're not going to get the full effect of it as a barbarian who had trained in great swords, basically. And that's really all proficiency bonuses is are you training in it? Are you good at it? So like any wizard could wield a great sword, but they're not going to get a proficiency bonus in it. So they're not going to deal that much damage, and they're not going to have a good time of trying to hit with it.
Unless it's a really weird build.
Yeah, unless they specifically
the worst wizard.
I cast the bonk spell, and it's just to hit you with a massive club.
What is it? Somebody had posted a meme, I think in the D&D subreddit, that was like, you're a bard. No, you're an orc wizard, except you think that normal attacking is a spell. So it's like, I cast death, and he just stabs a guy.
Yes.
That's the whole thing. It's like his spell book is just filled with like how to kill someone with a sword.
It's it's interesting.
Okay, so this makes infinitely more sense when put in that sense. So I'm gonna go ahead and say like equipment is just a list of items that your character is carrying at the time, so you don't go like, oh, well, I pull from my magical bag of bullshit the stick of finding water every time I'm looking
Exactly,
for it.
yeah.
You can't do that. It's not in your inventory. Yeah. Also, that doesn't exist. Fuck you.
Exactly.
And then features and traits are an explanation more so in depth of like racial traits
and class traits
and specific things you got. I'm guessing because of skills that you have.
Yeah, so from your class. So every class will get what's called features as they level up. And each one of those does certain things. Like a barbarian gets rage, which is a cool feature they get, where they get to deal extra damage and ignore other damage.
Okay. Which is why we see the rage tick here, which I'm guessing is
This is a different build of a warrior. They have like they've incorporated a rage system, which is interesting. But like second wind is a warrior thing. As a bonus action, you can regain hit points. They've got Maghar orc traits, ancestral call, savage blood. These are racial traits they put here to remember. The great thing about doing D&D over D&D Beyond or Roll20 or any of your digital platforms is it keeps track of these automatically, so you don't have to continually write them in. Like if I go to
there's like a checklist that you can do and then hit generate, and it literally like fills this page out.
Yeah.
Which is something I was going to ask is, do you think in this day and age, like with everyone having phones and tablets and computers, do you think that a character sheet is almost more useful digitally than it is like handwritten out now?
I think when you create the character, it's easier to do it with pen and paper right now, because like so this I've just pulled up one of my characters I made on D&D Beyond, and this is the UI it gives you. You can click any of these numbers to roll. I've got the pink fuzzy dice, and it'll roll the checks for you on D&D Beyond. I've filled out my different spells up to 9th level. I've got like it keeps track of a lot of stuff, but to really learn your character and the way in which it works, it's usually best to start off with pencil and paper, or pencil and paper, definitely not pen, because you will be erasing stuff. And the only reason that is just because it gets you really into how to create characters, which is something you'll really want to learn how to do playing D&D, because you'll probably be creating a lot of them. And it's just fun to kind of mess around and deal with different things. But it's a little bit trickier with pencil and paper because there's no like handheld go from point A to point B to point C. Like creating one in D&D Beyond or Roll20 where it's like, okay, you've picked your race, now you pick your class. Okay, now you add, we've already added all the bonuses for you. You don't even have to worry about it. But I think by doing it on pencil and paper, you learn how the math works, and you learn how the different skills work, and you learn how the different numbers influence all of each other. Whereas when like you create a character on D&D Beyond, you don't see that. They do all the math for you, which is, again, super helpful and great. They do all the hit point calculation for you. They do all the AC class or the armor class ratings for you. So you don't have to worry about any of the numbers being wrong. But at the same time, you don't get a good grasp of how the game works mechanically wise, because you had a machine do it for you.
Right, so you just be filling in the blank here.
Yeah. You basically just tell it what you want. It'll automatically roll stuff. Like, I mean, I think I can actually just like show you specifically how this one creates characters. Create a character. We're going to go standard. This is all the stuff I have added to it. So it lets you pick your race. So we can go Fallen Asmere. You pick, it shows you all the different racial abilities, right? And you just click choose. Then you go next. You see all these things here? None of these are options. They just tell you what they are. Go next. Which race do you want to go? Fighter. Add class. I have to pick 2 fighter skills. Let's do athletics and animal handling. A fighting style is defense. So it explains things to you, but you move along super quick, so you don't actually see like what any of this does, if that makes sense. So like now I'm in the...
Because for a new person, the attention span they're going to have to read all of this, unless they're super dedicated, is very slim.
Yeah.
Which means they probably have someone similar to you to me talking them through it that knows a lot more. So in this instance, you're probably less involved in the creation as a new player, unless you're strictly doing this on your own.
Yeah, exactly.
Then you would be with your friend being like, don't worry, this is what you need to do to do this. And then you're just like, all right.
And that's why I spoke about it last time a little bit, but that's why a session 0 is always helpful, to kind of just prepare everyone's characters. So like when I do a session 0, it's usually mostly character creation. Everyone brings an empty character sheet. Everyone brings their player's handbook. I'll bring the reference material if they don't have it, and then we go over specifically how to create a character. And it takes an hour or two for each person, especially if they're new and they don't know how the math works, which is totally fine. There's a learning curve there. I'm going to take this off.
That has always been, and this is going to sound super lazy, but genuinely my biggest deterrent to a lot of games, especially a lot of tabletop games, and this includes Yu-Gi-Oh! As stupid as that sounds, is math. Just the sheer amount of math that is required in order to collectively play a game like this has always deterred me, because I'm like, man, if only there was like a button I could push that just did the math.
Yeah, and there definitely is one. Like when you do D&D Beyond or Roll20 and you do these digital character sheets, it's super helpful, but it doesn't necessarily explain everything super well, and I prefer starting players to go through writing a character sheet down, because they can see, okay, I rolled my constitution's a 15, which means because it's a 15 through 16, it's a +3, which means that all of my constitution abilities and saving throws will be a +3. Unless I use my proficiency bonus, which is a +2, I see that. I'm writing it down. I can add the math together and figure it out. Even more so for spell casting characters. So that's a character sheet, and I think we also kind of went over what goes into making a character. It's 2 parts learning the mechanics, 2 parts knowing the world you're going to be playing in, and then like half a part of backstory, because backstory is important, I think, but a lot of your backstory, especially if your DM has a very specific idea in mind, will get fleshed out throughout the game. So it's not...
And from my understanding, like a backstory is less there for everyone, and it's more there to explain specific things on the character sheet, so that there's a reason that you have this ability, and it's not just like, I have it because when I woke up, God was like, there you go.
Yeah, and I think that like if to each his own, right? If you've got a character who really wants to put in a lot of work, or a player who wants to put in a lot of work and create like a 16-page long backstory, great. Use that if you're a DM. But also, if you've got someone who's literally got like 2 paragraphs and that's it, use that too. Because like the people who don't have a really well-prepared backstory are usually always open to having it helped with. Like the current group I'm with now, there was one guy who was like, I don't really know what my backstory is going to be. I don't know what I'm going to do. So I was like, okay, well, I asked him some very specific questions about his character, and we worked on it to a point to where he got like a working backstory. He got a working background of why his character does certain things, and he uses that to inform his future decisions, which is all really a backstory does, is it explains to everyone else why you do what you do, or why you have what you have.
So in that, do you feel that backstory is more important for characters who role play, or for individuals that role play characters, or do you think just for like general, we're just playing through, backstory is important too?
I think generally backstory is important, because even if you're not super into role playing and you don't LARP and you don't use character voices, which you should, because it's confusing otherwise. But if you don't, that's fine. It's still helpful to have in the back of your mind, okay, I was raised as an orphan, so maybe I'm distrusting of people. Maybe I'm not just going to play as myself. Because if you don't have
every parent in the game, because I didn't have parents, why should they?
Because otherwise you just start playing as yourself. And it's like, why am I playing a fantasy game as myself? It's like when you have in a video game the option to do good or bad, and it's like, well, I do good because I want to do good in real life. Okay, great, but you don't have to. Like, if your character's backstory is...
If I yell at someone in Fallout, I feel guilty.
Yeah.
So. Like, that's the thing. Like, that I am the worst when it comes to it, because when it comes to a game, I like to there's a fantastic YouTuber. I say fantastic. They're very clickbaity now, but I used to watch him for all the time for Fallout stuff. His name is MXR. That's what he does. He's a modder for Fallout, but he uses his word immersion a lot. And immersion is the name of the game. When it comes to me personally, the ultimate way to make sure that I am in the game, like how do I know that I am giving it the full aspect, is to put as much as myself into it as possible. Because then it's never a question of, well, what would you do? Well, I know exactly what I do.
My character.
It's me. I know exactly what I'm doing.
Yeah, and I think that's the best way to play the game, is to see the character you're playing as a separate entity from yourself. So like you've got your backstory, you've got your background, you've got your class and your race, and that character is... Joe, and it's not me, it's Joe. When I'm playing D&D, I'm Joe. I'm not John. I'm Joe. And it's helpful because then you can make character-based decisions as opposed to, well, I wouldn't, murder a vampire.
You expand your horizons and the idea of the fact that you're not the idea. Like, okay, yeah, nothing against people like myself. I state to that play themselves, right?
Yeah.
You're like, I am going to be.
Yeah.
My name's
There's
Jacob.
nothing wrong
But
with
I'll
that.
be Jacob. The fucking human farmer from whatever the fuck that became a warrior because his parents were killed and he was conscripted in the military. Great, you did the thing. You were playing yourself. Congratulations.
Yeah.
But then that character's gonna die. You can't keep playing that character forever. So now it's time to
Surprise.
broaden the horizons and maybe play like a female elf because you've never done that before.
Yeah.
It would be crazy to see what you're. So like this, it's not about boxing yourself into a situation. Like the idea behind backstory and everything is to break out. It actually, and again, as we talked about last week, this to genuinely make you a better person because it forces you to experience things from a different perspective.
Yeah.
Which is the whole point. So
And
shout out
it
to
keeps
you
it
in solving all the world's problems.
it keeps it from becoming well, why did your character do that? Because he wanted to. Okay, but like what's his motivation? Like what drove him to murder 16 guards in the barracks for no reason? Oh, I just wanted to. Okay, God, that's the worst. It's the worst when that's just I wanted to. Like, okay, great, but would your character do that? Would your life cleric do that?
You're here for the free nachos. That's why you're here, isn't it? It's
Which again is fine if that's the expectation, which is again what you got to set always. What are the playable races in D&D? So if you go to Jujul and you go to if you just Google playable races D&D 5e, you'll get a really big list off of D&D Beyond. And I'm going to go through them really quick. We got Dragonborn, Dwarf, Elf, Gnome, Half-Elf, Halfling, Half-Orc, Human, Tiefling. That's like the base set that comes in the player's handbook. This is the set that we've always had for 5e. Pretty basic group, each one with kind of different strengths and weaknesses. Usually the most common one is the half-elf because they get really good skills while also maintaining the elvish ability to not be charmed or fall asleep. Then we've got, there's a source book for Theros, which gives us a Leonin, which is a lion race, like a bipedal humanoid lion race, which is really cool. Then we've got Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, which introduced lineages, which is a really complicated way of playing like actual Frankenstein's monster characters. Like you can be a Dampier.
So like you're like a specific race. So let's say you're like an elf. You're like a full elf at this point. But your ancestry states that you had
this
a lion person in it forever ago, and you're like, "Maha!" That allows me to
not so much. The lineages in Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft is more based on like you have a character and then they went through something and now they are this way. So like you had a human that got trapped by a crazy scientist and experimented on. So now you have a ghost limb. Like your left arm was cut off, but it's still there in astral form. Or maybe you're literally a Frankenstein's monster and you woke up on a slab with no memory of your past life, but you're definitely an orc, but you've got like an elf's, toe stitched on and a dwarf's beard sewn on. And like there's another one, Dampier, which is like a lesser evil vampire that has more control. Okay, maybe you were a high elf that got bitten by a vampire and now you're a Dampier, like searching for the vampire that did this to you so you can kill it. So that it's more like Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft is more like the horror setting anyway, because Ravenloft is all about like vampires, werewolves, shit like that.
it's like the Transylvania book.
Yeah, and that's the book I'm using for my current campaign, which is really fun. Then Strixhaven introduced owlins, which are an owl race. So pretty, like it's an owl race. It's a race of owls.
Bipedal human owl people. It's like the Raven people, but owl.
Yeah, and then you've got the big one, the monsters of the multiverse. You've got the Aarakocra, which are the eagle race, the Azamar, which are the angelic race. It's people who their lineage, at some point, an angel or an angel of some variety got in there somewhere. You've got the various Genasi, which are genie-inspired races, air, wind, fire, and earth.
Like Jinn,
wait, I said air and wind.
More Jinn and less genie, because genie I think bottled. Jinn is more like spirits of like smoke and stuff.
So you've got water, air, earth, and fire. Then you've got bugbears, which are a type of goblinoid race.
Like that hell, the bug, like based off the Greek bugbear, which is like the I can sleep with anything and it become pregnant monster.
No, this is not what that is. A bugbear.
Okay,
A bugbear is like a big or like a smaller troll type creature.
If you don't know what that is, at some point in your life, please Google that because it's terrifying. Generally, there's a story about a bugbear humping a tree, and the tree becomes pregnant and gives birth to a bear, and you're like,
yeah, that's
what?
how it works, man. Then you've got centaur. You should know what that is. You've got a changeling, which are a type of fae that can change their attributes. You've got a deep gnome, which is a gnome that's underground. You've got the Duragar, which are dwarves that are even more underground than the normal dwarves. You've got Eladrin, which are it's like elves but seasonal. So you have summer, autumn, spring, and winter.
They like
elves
hibernate, or are they just like their physical form?
Their physical form looks more like a season. They're elves of the Feywild. So they're
like
more.
There's like a beach elf that's like the summer elf, and he's just like
he's got on some floaties and like a a snorkel.
Like, sup, bro? Yeah, we gonna go hit up the big nature tree.
You've got fairies, which is a fairy, a furbolg, which we explained a bit earlier. We've got the Gith, which we discussed.
Yep.
Goblins, Goliaths. Hobgoblins, Kinkus, Harangon, which is a rabbit race, which are again a type of fae, which is fun. Kobold, which are like mini dragons or lizards, not to be confused with lizard folk, which are like Argonians to some extent.
Okay, but a dragonborn is actually a dragon race of people.
Yes, so there's dragonborn, kobolds, and lizard folk, which are all very distinctive but sort of similar. The kobold is small. It's the smallest draconic creature in the multiverse. And they don't have a lot of scales, like big scales. The lizard folk are more reptilian than draconic. And the dragonborn are straight up just like humanoid dragons.
So like dragon in hand, dragon in feet, but like bipedal body and dragon head.
Yeah, absolutely.
They wear armor and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Minotaur, orc, satyr, sea elf, which is an elf of the sea, not to be confused with the Triton. The Shadar Kai, but the Shadar Kai are a type of elf from the Feywilds that live in between life and death, thanks to something that happened in the Shadowfell that kind of killed them but didn't kill them. Kind of like Schrodinger's.
Got it.
Yeah. You've got shifters, which can change from humanoid to bestial. You've got the Tabaxi, which we talked about.
Wait a second, this is an entire race of people that kind of have like the what is that class? Druid, but like with like chain shape, like shape.
Wild shape is what they have.
Yeah.
But the shifter, this is like their racial thing. Tabaxi, the cat people, Tortle, which is just a turtle, a bipedal turtle. Triton.
Oh, okay, I thought you were gonna tell me it's literally just a turtle.
No, it's just a pet turtle.
No bipedal. It's just a big. It's the big ass turtle pope, and he just walks around.
You've got a Triton, and then the Yuan-Ti, which are snake people. Not like actual snakes, but like bipedal snake people with long forked tongues and fangs.
Which is where the whole joke about the snake women having boobs or not.
Yeah.
Has become a thing. Yeah.
It's like, it doesn't matter. Then we've got the Eberron setting, which introduced the Warforged, which are like a robotic race that are made from wood and metal. They can still feel pain and emotion, though. They were built for Eberron during their war, but now the war's over, so it's like, they've got this whole race of things that don't really know what's going on with them.
Okay, so in comparison, again, for my own brain, Dragon Age Origins Shale.
Yeah, to some extent, yeah.
Not a golem, but...
Yeah.
Like, in the same thing as, like, it is a race of people that was created specifically for one purpose, and now that purpose is complete, they're, like, being used for just whatever the fuck they can be used for, because they're just existing at this point.
Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica introduced the Luxodon, which is an elephant race, as well as the Simic Hybrid, which they're just like an amalgamation of various races and beasts combined. They kind of are very fluid.
So you can have like half raven, half eagle people and call it a day?
Yeah, sort of, to some extent. They give you a lot of animal enhancement abilities with the Simic Hybrid. The Vidalcan are like a blue-skinned gnome, for lack of a better description, but they're more scientific and less crazy. Then we've got a couple, two weird ones. The Lokatha, which are fish folk that have escaped slavery. Yeah. And then the Grung, which are, are like a frog race that are poisonous.
Interesting. So swamp environment,
definitely
probably really good, but humid areas and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Man,
so that's all the races.
Now, are these all one world, technically? I mean, I know that D&D is, like, based in whatever you put it in, but, like, based off the book, because I know that they come up with, like, their own mini campaigns.
Yeah,
kind of
so you could use
one giant planet of people, or each different book, like, a different...
No, so each of these, like, groups, like I mentioned, some were from Eberron. Eberron is a setting. Ravnica is a setting. Lakatha is a setting. These are places where those races will be more prevalent. I mean, not saying they can't make their way to somewhere else. Like the Leonin and Theros can find its way into the Forgotten Realms, but generally it's from Theros, which is the setting.
But this is to be considered one giant planet, but different continents that these different races of people. Okay, so these are completely. When you say realm,
think of it. It's a multiverse. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, because I'm thinking like, damn, this is a massive planet.
No. So that's why the new book is called
Snow Marsh and some shit and.
The new book is called Monsters of the Multiverse, and for good reason, is because these all exist throughout the different dimensions and realms, which are a big thing.
So, would it be more of a homebrew game to have a race of people that's not originally from a specific realm appear in a different realm?
Yeah, I mean it's not impossible. Like the Gith specifically travel between realms using the astral plane. Like they actually travel by dragon through the astral plane to other realms
because they're off trying to fuck up mind flayers.
Yeah, they're trying to kill Illithids.
The coolest backstory of any character.
Which again, mind flayers also are cross dimensional. They also travel.
They're chasing these mofo's through the multiverse. That's so. But it's funny. Is like I picture this deep grizzled man, like the swoop in, like they're riding the dragon, like backstory, and it's this. Like Hugh Jackman deep, like I traveled across the multi, but then like in real life you'd hear guap 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 guap. It's like what the fuck?
That's exactly what it is. How did you know?
Fish people.
So yeah, those are all the races. You can find these really easily on D&D Beyond and get like the basic stuff. You can also just Google them because D&D Beyond.
There's probably some great videos out there too of people that delve into like the actual like racial history of each of these.
Yeah, and they're all very interesting. Like I've read most of them and they're pretty cool. Even like the ones you'd think are basic. It's interesting, and there's not like any like super crazy amount of reading to do to get the background on the race you want to play. But it's
there's like D&D books. Is it not like books like the resource guides, but like there's like in realm lore building like books of like different
a big example is the Legend of Drizzt, which is like a story that covers Drizzt, a drow, that goes several volumes worth of just fiction that expands upon the Forgotten Realms world using the perspective of this drow, Drizzt Do'Urden, who is pretty cool. But yeah, they've got plenty of books set in that setting. They've got lots of resources in their actual D&D books, and also just other kind of spin-off fiction novels that are fun to read.
Cool. I'm a huge nerd when it comes to like reading established lore books. Yeah. The only one that I refuse to get into is Warhammer 40k because
it's a lot.
That is the wormhole to end all wormholes.
It's not. No, it is pretty complicated. I think I spent probably about 4 hours one night just going through it. Yeah. So let's see. What are the playable classes for D&D is the next question. That is a lot simpler because there's less of them, and they don't generally add new classes. They add subclasses. So alphabetically, we're gonna start. There's barbarian, bard, cleric, druid, fighter, monk, paladin, ranger, rogue, sorcerer, warlock, wizard, and then they added artificer, and then Critical Role actually created their own known as the Blood Hunter, which is sort of like a warlock fighter variant that's really cool. It's not like it does not play like a warlock or a fighter, but kind of like flavor wise it's similar.
Okay. So how do you say that? Is it artificer?
Artificer.
So it is artificer. That
Artificer,
is okay.
yes, artificer.
And that is like the tech wizard, right? Like
Yeah.
he uses like steam powered looking.
Yeah, they're
like
masters of
steampunk
invention, and they use mechanics and magic to get stuff done. Like one of the subclasses is alchemist, so that's like kind of the same vein.
You know, aren't they the closest thing to like a gunslinger you could get in D&D without
Yeah.
it becoming like a?
Yeah, so they've got like one of the subclasses gives you like a sentry. There is so Critical Role also has one. It's not, I don't think it's an official one, but they've got a gunslinger class that I think one of their characters actually plays as Percy. He's a gunslinger, and they've published like the rules for playing a gunslinger that you can find like homebrew. So you could get that.
Like, yeah, but I think there's just more like flintlock weapons instead of like full auto.
Oh,
Because, like,
yeah.
it would be like fucking ridiculous if you were walking around with like an RPG.
Yeah, no, it's more sort of turn of the century firearms, not modern firearms. Like, you still have to take a little while to load.
We're not quite at cowboy yet. But
Yeah,
we're like
slightly before.
We're like at pirate era colonial weaponry.
Yeah. So those are the classes. They don't, like I said, they don't generally add new classes as much as they add new races, but they do add a lot of subclasses. So generally, at second, third, or first, second, or third level, you'll pick your subclass, which will give you more kind of flavor on how your character works, all the mechanics they get. But it's generally they all are fun to play. Like I've never played a class where I was like, "Damn, that was sucky."
Most of my experience is playing monks.
Monks are fun. Monks have a lot. Monks have some good subclasses. They've got key points. They get really strong. I
Didn't
like
Drunken Master become a subclass of?
Yeah, Way of the Drunken Master.
Oh, awesome! I love that.
You move with
Jackie
jerky,
Chan running
unpredictable
around.
movements to keep people always guessing on what your next move is, which is funny.
It's like, who do you play? My character is Jackie Chan, and that is the character she's.
Yeah. Your 17th level feature is called Intoxicated Frenzy, and it gives you a total of 5 flurry of blow attacks, which is pretty fucking awesome.
Now, do you take like a accuracy debuff because
Nope.
you're drunk as shit?
Well, you're not actually drunk. The lore behind this is you learn to act like a drunk, but you are not necessarily drunk.
Okay, so
Yeah.
but that could be a creative choice to actually.
Yeah, you could. The Drunken
I
Master's
started off with normal.
erratic stumbles conceal a carefully executed dance of blocks, parries, attacks, and retreats, is what the actual page says.
Like those who actually train in Drunken Master can't have like liver failure constantly, so it's just they mimicked high professional acting of.
Yeah, it's
That
more you're trying to keep opponents thinking that you're not as good as you really are.
It's a cool side or subcategory of monk, because again it's just like somebody was a fan of that crap and was like, oh, we gotta have that. We
Yeah,
gotta have that.
absolutely, absolutely.
These guys are Shaolin. We're doing it.
100%. But yeah, so that's classes covered very briefly.
We covered backstory briefly already, so we
Yep.
can kind of move on from that. Okay, so this next question I'm gonna hold till the end, and we'll actually use that right before we get into the episode ending question, because
That's
I feel
smart.
like that one's gonna be another kind of lengthy
Yeah.
one. Okay, so the next question is sort of paired into that, but we'll go ahead. So should you build a character based off of
No.
personal interest or based off of your party?
Based off your interest, not based off your party. Don't. That plays into metagaming. I do not like when people try to like get one over on the DM and be like, oh well, we've got to make sure we've got the perfect. Okay, I get it. Like you want to play the traditional deeps, tank, healer rotation, right? You want your 2 or 3 deeps, your 1 healer, your 1 tank. But literally, it doesn't fucking matter because they give you so many options and versatility in this game. Just play what you think is going to be the most fun or the most interesting. Don't try and base it around what your party's doing, because that assumes you know above table what's going on and you have no clue what's going on as your character.
See, that's what I'm asking, is like in the sense of like, wouldn't that all be based heavily on like the story the DM was playing though?
Yeah.
Because if it's like the entirety of your village was murdered while you were away in a hunting camp, and it's like, oh crap, well, not everybody in the party was from the hunting camp, so you're like, well, we're gonna definitely need like a healer of some sort if we're going on an adventure. Like, is there some above board like planning between characters that would make sense?
That's
without
totally
being considered
fine.
meta?
What I don't like is when people intentionally make people feel like they have to play a certain class
They're like,
because
oh, it's John. I
we've
know what
already
his big bat's gonna be, so we got an artificer.
yeah
we got a wizard.
we've already got 3 healers. You can't play a healer too. Well, yeah, you can't. No one gives a fuck. It's to have fun. Like, play what you want to play. Like, I will always advise that you have at least 1 healer, but if you want to run a team with no healers, cool. I don't give a fuck. Buy healing potions. Yeah. Buy a lot of potions.
Fucking just in the background popping bottles.
Make friends with a cleric, I guess. But it's one of those things that it's
by
like
a lot of churches. You're gonna need them.
People forget the game is to have fun, not to win. Like, as long as you're having fun, you're winning.
Yeah,
Even
I
if
guess
you
like
die.
in a tournament it would be a little different, but like I don't hear of those very often. So
Yeah, that is I've never witnessed that, nor would I really.
well, like
want to.
I've seen one, and it was actually here on Twitch. There was a Coliseum guest tournament, and it was 1DM, and they were doing like a prize pool. It was like a $100 Amazon gift card or something. But the idea was like you took characters from a pre-established campaign, and you put them in a tournament against each other as like a gladiator kind of setting. It was interesting to see, but there was a lot of screwed people because they were like, "Oh fuck, I am strictly a healer." So it's like, you can hit me how you want. I'm just gonna fucking stand over here.
And that's fun
No
to deal
damage
with,
to
but
you.
that's more like a one-off special time event.
Oh yeah. It was mainly just an excuse for a bunch of people that were quote unquote internet famous to get together.
And if you're like friends with your group and like it's not like a totally new setting and you kind of talk beforehand about what you want the party to look like, you can kind of fill spots like that. But there's always every campaign I've run, there's always been that like brief moment where everyone's like, we don't have a healer. The next guy's got to be. I'm like, no, stop. You don't have to have that. Or, oh my god, we're all spellcasters. We need someone to take. No, you don't. Just play what you want to play.
The next character sheet just happens to be exactly what the party needs.
Yeah, it's like just play how you want to play. I'm not gonna penalize people for wanting to have fun and not play a healer, because like I would never play a healer. Honestly, like I don't like just
those specific classes. Like it's so funny how people like I play a tank in almost everything I do.
Yeah.
Like literally even into games like Elden Ring, I play a tank.
Yeah.
Because I suck. So if I can just sponge damage all day, then I can't die.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's the way to do it, and that's the point. Is this game allows so much versatility to shoehorn people into this role that they have to play does them a disservice, because there's no reason you can't have a fun game, a long game, and a good game with 4 DPS. You know, you can. It's going to be probably a different challenge than you would, but you'll probably kill a bunch of shit quicker. You just might be a little bit more closer to dying at the end of the battle.
Yeah, so it's like starter Pokemon, you know, with the fire, water,
Yeah.
grass.
There's always going to be a weakness.
There's a point where it's like, okay, what are you trying to do at the beginning? Because you can build a character that's super powerful in the beginning, but then in late game you're like struggle busting behind everybody else because you blew your load early.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, in this case, for those of you that need the translation, that's the fire starter, because you always get fucked over by, you know, like the third gym leader who's water and you're screwed. So
Yeah.
grass type's the I'm taking the neutral board, water type's the I want the hard early game and the better end game, and then fire type is the easy out of the gate. Then so it's the same thing with character builds. So you can go in and be like, I've fucking got all the attack damage, but like,
Yeah.
fuck me if anybody breathes in my direction.
Yeah, that's literally playing
Glass
wizard. Your
cannon
hit
as
dice
fuck.
is a D6, and it's just not fun to play early levels.
I've got a 5 hit point.
Yeah, literally.
I was born with leprosy. That was my.
So
we're gonna-
short answer, no, you should not base your character off of your party unless it's like a 10% reason. Like, okay, I've really got this, and it's coming down to like 2 choices. I'm not sure. Okay, well, let me see what the party needs. Okay, yeah, then it's
Yeah,
fine.
'cause I guess like if you're like late to a party anyway, like they're like 2 or 3 sessions in, and they're
Yeah.
like, look, man, I hate to ask you, but we're dying. Can you please be like a random person we meet that's a healer? And you're like,
Yeah.
yeah, sure, whatever. Because at that point, like you can incorporate it as like a chance, whatever. But
Yeah.
okay, but take the advice. Don't build your character based off the party.
Now, base it off
unless
what you
it's
want to play.
pre-established that is what you'd be coming in.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm gonna skip this next one because I feel like that one might take a second, so we'll come back to that later.
Okay.
Okay, so your opinion, as summarized as you can make it for time, what is your recommended race and class for beginner? Like, if you were gonna build one, like this is your first game of D&D, you've never played, and you want them to have a good time, you want them to feel like they're, you know, contributing, but you don't want them to feel like they're overwhelmed with having to learn stuff. Like, what would you recommend?
Okay, so this is so subjective.
Who is the Liu Kang of D&D?
This is so subjective though.
Okay,
I
well,
hate
from
questions
your
like
experience, though, this is strictly
Yeah,
caveated.
so my experience,
John's
the
opinion.
easiest types of races to play are the ones in the player's handbook because they're very, normal things. Generally, an elf, dwarf, or human is not going to do you wrong because you know already what their backgrounds are. You know dwarfs live in the mountains or the hills, elves live in the trees or in tall cities, humans live wherever the fuck they want because they're humans. You know what their propensities are, you know how to handle playing one of them because you've seen them in TV, you've seen them in movies, all this other stuff. So those three are generally good to start with. As far as class goes, it just depends. Like if you're wanting more of a spell casting type, I would go with cleric to start off because it's got kind of a heavy spell casting. It's very versatile, so you can go defense, offense, or healing. And it's also got good melee. Like it's got good standard attacks. You get, your warhammer, your axe, and your shield. But you also get, shield of faith and healing word and literally paladins get smite. Or you can take like spiritual weapon, all this other stuff. So cleric is a good starting spellcaster race, and it also doesn't have like a crazy ton of spell rules, as opposed to like your wizards and your sorcerers. For your more hand-to-hand combat, I would go with fighter, just because fighter's an easy to understand race or class. You got your sword, your shield, you're gonna stab, you're gonna defend. The subclasses are not too difficult to understand. They've got a lot, but they're all different versions of another class. So they're fairly easy, but they're also not underrated. Like they've got up to let's see, I think at 20th level you get a total of 3 different attacks in one turn, which is great. You get a bunch of different martial archetype features, which help out in whatever if you want to go tanking or DPS. You start off with a lot of proficiencies in weapons and armor. You get action surge at 2nd level, which means you can take 1 additional action per turn.
Okay.
Which could be an attack action or attack action if you'd like. So they're just really good at dishing out damage or taking damage if they're tanking more often. So fighters are definitely your easier to understand martial class, and cleric, for my opinion at least, is the easier to understand and also cleric is a lot easier to role play because a cleric, like, okay, you're a pastor or a type of, maybe you're more monk based, a man of the cloth.
Faith,
yeah. So you have a god that gives you your powers. You either worship or at least communicate in some way with that god. It's very easy to role play, as opposed to like warlock's probably a little bit easier mechanical wise because they only get 2 spell slots the entire time.
Right, and
but
that's the one that has like a deity that you get your power from. Like,
yeah,
you made like a contract with like a eldritch fucking horror.
Yeah,
and it's
so as opposed to like the cleric, you communicate with your god and they grant you the power. The warlock has made a deal with an entity, not necessarily a god. Maybe it's a fairy, maybe it's a demon, maybe it's something else, Cthulhu. Yeah, and that's how they get their power. But warlocks have a lot of issues role playing because a lot of people just fall into an evil warlock, and that's kind of annoying and kind of passe. Everyone plays an evil warlock,
there's probably a lot of backstory you could do because like not every warlock's like, I want power. It's like my whole family was slaughtered and I just want enough power to get vengeance and then I'm good.
Yeah, and they also get eldritch invocations, and that they have their subclasses are a lot more varied. So warlock's a little bit more complicated than a beginner would probably be comfortable playing.
Sounds like to me like the average everyday man stumbled into some power.
Yeah,
like,
basically.
I feel like that is the best way to play that. Is like Bob was a family man and his house burned down because some raiders came through and he swore vengeance on the raiders, and some shadow figure showed up and said, "Hey man, you've never touched magic before in your life, but what if I told you that for one easy payment of 2 orphan souls, I can give you all the power you want?"
So those are probably the 2 easiest classes to play starting out. The harder ones are going to be your bard, your wizard.
Now you gotta speak and
be So that's what I would recommend if you're just starting out. But again, if you want to play something different, just do it. It's going to be fun. Rather you play something you don't quite understand and have fun than worry about understanding something and play something you don't want to be and not have fun, but still be able to play well, if that makes sense.
So just, again, it's half do your own research, understand the characters you're playing, but also speak with the people you're playing with, because if you have resources of people that you're playing with that are willing to help you feel something out, do whatever you want.
Yeah.
If you have less resources, then taking on one of these recommendations might make it more comfortable for you just to learn the game.
Definitely.
Okay, so the leveling up question.
Yeah, this one's going to be kind of quick because it's more based on how your DM operates. I award experience for combat as well as dealing, and we talked about this last time, as well as dealing with situations passively.
Because not everything needs
or
to be
peacefully,
killed.
rather. Yeah. So there's not really an effective way to level up, and it's not like a video game. You don't want to just keep doing things to level up. I prefer, honestly, benchmark levels. So like at a certain point in the story, you gain a level, because then it takes the onus off the player to do things to level up, and more it puts it on me to advance the story along.
It's like world experience. Like it's the
like, okay, when you get
of you as a character and not you as a physical action.
So I generally prefer to run campaigns where, okay, this is arc A. When they get to point 2 of arc A, they're going to experience a level up. It doesn't matter really what they've done, because at that point in the story, they will have done enough to warrant it. But you know, it depends on what the players are comfortable with. It depends on what the DM's comfortable with, because then you might, by doing them in the benchmark way, levels in the benchmark way, you might remove any motivation for the characters to do anything. So you really got to have strong role-playing characters to where they will still do stuff, even if they know killing 20 goblins might not necessarily get them a level up, but you know, walking from point A to point B might. So it's a little bit tricky. You've got to play it by ear with your group. So like right now, I do combat-based level up because my group really likes fighting. They really love fighting a lot.
I mean, it could kind of be a hybrid in that sense too, because like world experience plus, if part of that world experience is you kill 30 goblins, like you could kind of vary it based off of like, hard fought battle,
and it's always easy to shift, because like as the DM, you're in control of everything, and whatever you say goes. So like if you want to reward them experience halfway through a fight because they handle something wrong, just do it. It doesn't fucking matter. They'll be happy to get the experience. Yeah,
they're excited just to fucking get a pat on the head and called, you know, good sport.
Yeah.
For the next one is okay, so to explain, this is something I'm doing for time's sake. Okay, so the meta question, I think I'm going to hold off on for this episode.
That's fine. Yeah,
we're actually going to come back in another episode and just go over metagaming.
Yeah, that's going to be
how
like
to
a whole
avoid
thing.
it, what it does, like, because that's going to be a heavy topic. So I'm going to hit you with this last question, and then I'm going to ask you the question which will lead into next episode, which I think will be interesting. So what is a half race and how do you make it?
I don't know.
This is strictly my own curiosity.
I don't know what that is,
because I know
Murph.
that they're.
That's not a real thing. You've just no. I'm kidding. A half race. So like you've got the traditional half orc, which is like a normal thing, and then through homebrew you can kind of have these any type of race you'd like. Like maybe your mom's an elf and your dad's a dwarf, so you're a half elf dwarf thing.
Oh, that'd be a fucked looking.
Yeah,
person.
It'd be interesting. They just come out as a human.
Well, again, yeah. So playing into my next question, but it's funny that you should say that. So.
Yeah. So I think that that is more based on the rules of the DM and the rules of the campaign, and it's more homebrew than anything, because the only half races we have are half elf and half orc, where because
and is it anything can be half elf or half orc, or specific races can be
no
half
it's
orc?
I think it's okay, obviously like if it's a minotaur and an elf there might be some questions.
Say like if there's an elephant in an elf.
Yeah, but I think they leave it pretty open.
Gonna die.
They leave it pretty open so that anything can mate with an elf and become a half elf, and maybe you look different than most half elves would because you're a sea serpent that mated with a half elf or with an elf.
It's like there's just a snake and an elf.
Yeah,
and like
that's a snelf. So that one's more based on the DM's discretion, half races. But you can pick and choose racial features pretty easily to kind of make your own. At the start of my campaign, one of my characters wanted to be half genie, or half djinn, and I was okay with it. But they really, I don't think they cared for the background that it came with, and the story wasn't really fitting them, so they kind of just dropped it, and they don't that's not part of their story, and I was cool with that. I was like, okay, cool. Yeah, it was like, okay, well, we don't have to have that be a thing. Like, I don't really care.
Instead of his parents, it's like my Uncle Greg was a genie.
Yeah, so it's more based on like why you would want that, and like you got to have a good reason for why it would be that way, because like there's not a lot of minotaurs shacking up with dwarves, so why would you be a half dwarf, half minotaur?
The only things I can think of are things that you would not want to use in his story because they're very awful. Like,
yeah.
Get out of here. No.
Yeah. So again, it's totally up to the players and the DM to sort this out. But there's nothing wrong with it.
There's only the two. There's only half orc and half
elf.
There's no other by the book half races of anything.
Yeah.
So what is a halfling? What is?
Oh,
is that just a short person?
No, a halfling is. They're not called a halfling because they're a half of anything. They're more. Well, actually, let me look this up before I talk out of my ass. Halflings are, I believe, sort of fey in a sense, and they're a good race to play as. They've got a lot of good halfling.
Halfling is used a lot of different. Like my own stupidity, not knowing. I've always assumed that it was because they were like half of a what I would consider lesser race in that sense. So it was like half elf, half fairy, and you're like, okay.
Yeah, so they're called halflings just because they're short. That's it. They're not half of anything.
So it's not quite a dwarf. They're just a short person, and that's
it. So they're about 3 feet tall. Yeah. So they're definitely not a hobbit.
A fucking absolutely savage name for a race of people to just be called.
Yeah.
Half the size of an overman.
Yeah. So a lot of people confuse halflings with hobbits just because they think that that's what it is. But a halfling is much smaller than a hobbit, generally. So they're more. They have that same sort of bent. Like they're very pastoral. They love eating. They're very curious. They blend in very well. But they're
so it's the closest equivalent to a hobbit you can get in D&D natively.
Yes, and they do live well into 200 years of age, so they're pretty old as far as of a race.
So they're like a demi-human kind of thing. They're like not quite human, but they have enough of a feature of a human to be okay.
There's a lot of different like ideas of where they came from. A lot of them involving like the fairies and the fae of some sort. Like they probably got their magic from that. But they're a happy folk, but they're not a half of any race. They're more just short. That's why they call them halflings.
Well, there we go. That answers that.
Yes.
All right. So again, thank you. I didn't know. I genuinely assumed it was because they were like some sort of combination.
No.
Okay. So final question. This is the send-off question that we do.
Dun, dun.
End of every episode, I present him with a question that will be used to tie into the next episode, as we did today, and that will lead us into the next one. And the next episode is world building. As a DM, the importance of a good story and what the world is. And my question for you, for a thought provoker here, is what is, for a non-D&D player, a good non-D&D subject that you can use to base a world off of without having to completely change everything? Like Dragon Age, Elder Scrolls, Lord of the Rings. Like, what is a good basis that you can set up as a new DM that you don't have to go through and be like, well, it's this, but I have to change everything because D&D.
Okay.
Because me, as we were talking about with interbreeding and stuff, like I know it's not correct, but like when I picture like half orc health, they're like, this is some weird combination. I always just picture Mass Effect with the Asari, because like regardless of how they mate, it's always an Asari.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter what you do, it's an
always
Asari
gonna
person.
be an Asari. Yeah.
Or it's like, and what's weird is like Dragon Age, the elves. I didn't know this until I read the books. Elf is recessive.
Yeah.
So if a human and an elf mate, they always come out human. There's never an elf, and that's so crazy to me because you've beaten the games, right? Like all of them. Did you read any of the books?
No, I didn't read the books.
Okay, I'm gonna. Never mind. I can't spoil it. I'm gonna let you read the books
because we're on.
Bro,
we're
I
on
have
Twitch.
never cried reading a book harder than the first 2 Dragon Age books, and I did that at work, which is super embarrassing.
You're showing your sensitive side, Murph.
Dude, bro, it's about Alistair's dad.
Yeah.
It's Merrick, and it's the story of how he comes to power and then how he meets the people. Bro, Logain and Alistair and all. Oh god, it's such a good book, man. The Mass Effect books were trash. Like, I love that guy for writing the games, but what the fuck were those books? But dude, the Dragon Age books are so well thought out. Again, tangent. Absolutely recommend those. If you're not even a fan of Dragon Age, you don't have to play any of the fucking game. Just read the first 2 books. Worth it. worth it because you get to
Definitely.
figure out who Duncan was before he was a Grey Warden, and it's so cool.
Nice. That's a
Yeah.
little
All right,
recommendation.
so that's my question. Those are my recommendations. I'm just gonna start doing that since I do that every time.
You
Jake's
do.
recommendation for things to do.
Yeah.
Read the Dragon Age books. They're fucking fantastic.
They're great.
They're written by the lead writer of the games, which is even better. So
Dope.
Ah.
All right. Well, thank you for your questions, Murph. I hope I answered them in a somewhat coherent manner. We didn't ramble nearly as much as we did last time.
Yeah, well, we're getting the hang of it now that we'll actually have a way to come back. And as we get this, we'll get it bad. Logos are coming up.
Yes.
I've got some ideas for that. We're going to have little intros. I'm going to start, as soon as funds start coming in, I'm going to get us set up to where it automatically posts us to things like Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
Yeah, definitely.
And stuff like that.
Once we get that $1 million deal with D&D, the company.
I was going to
D&D.
say with what is it? The pickle company.
What?
I was going to say like a random, like I eat a lot of
Vlasic,
pickles.
the pickle company?
Yeah, Vlasic.
Oh my
Vlasic
God.
Pickles fucking sponsors. every
I hate
episode
pickles.
I have to have a jar.
This is
and
not.
eat one
This is
pickle.
not good. I will
And
not eat a pickle. You cannot.
That's
pay me
fine.
to eat
I'll
a
do it.
pickle.
I'll eat the fucking pickle.
You can eat all the pickles, Murph. I do not like
McDonald's. You know McDonald's is sponsoring podcasts now. That's a thing.
That
All
makes
you have to do is
sense.
plug it. I just have a bag of McDonald's,
and
eat
even then, I
fries.
would not eat McDonald's. It makes me sick.
Is this okay? Hey, you.
Not
look,
a description of
I'll eat-
McDonald's
I will
food,
shovel whatever garbage.
but
anyone
more a
wants.
weakness of my intestinal tract. It's anything makes me sick.
Oh,
to be
I'll
honest.
die, but I'll die after the podcast, and that's fine.
After I cash that check.
I have. We have some plans coming up for anybody that's curious about it. We do have a YouTube channel.
Yes.
We do have a YouTube channel. I don't know if it's linked below yet, but we do have a YouTube channel.
think it
We do
is.
have a Twitter, so feel free to follow us on that. I'm getting it set up to where it will automatically announce when we go live on the Twitter. So for people who are curious, we have a Discord.
Yes.
Feel free to pop into that Discord. Also, don't know if that's been linked yet, but we'll get that done. Once that's linked, you can hop in. There's a section where you can interact with us and ask questions.
Yeah.
And recommend episodes or recommend topics or bring up anything that you think that needs to be addressed now in the community that hasn't maybe been addressed before, or how you view things
Yeah.
and stuff. We can debate that because
But for the love of
you
God,
never
don't
know.
talk to me, please. I'm
Yeah.
so in the zone.
You can
talking
liaise on
Murph.
everything to me.
Yeah.
We do have an email address that you can get in touch with. That's what's in the podcast or what's in the dungeon podcast at Gmail.
Gmail.com, yep.
Yep, gmail.com. So feel free to email us there. Any questions, comments, concerns you may have, any suggestions. If you guys know somebody that wants to throw money at us, that's absolutely fine.
Oh, Murph, I've just breaking news. That is not the. It's actually what's in the
Gmail?
dungeon at gmail.com. There's no podcast
Yeah,
there.
what's in
'Cause
the okay.
for
what's
whatever
in the
reason, I
dungeon
couldn't
at
put
gmail.com.
podcast.
There's
I
no
don't know why.
question after that. Is there like a question mark?
No, there's no special characters. It's just what's in the dungeon, one word, at gmail.com.
Yeah, because it's what's in the dungeon question mark on Twitter. So I
Yes.
don't know.
Yes, what's in the
But it's-
dungeon
but
question
it's
mark.
WITD podcast is the actual follow
Yeah.
because what's in the dungeon was taken by some dude from like Paraguay.
Yeah. Damn
For
it,
some
Paraguay. Always
And
with
it wasn't
good
D&D
handles.
related, so let your mind settle on what that is.
It's definitely some bad shit.
So we've got, we're getting the flow of it. This is technically episode 1 because last week's
2.
was episode 0.
It's 2. This is episode 2, Murph.
Well,
2.
technically, but we don't have an episode 1 posted.
We have no
so
proof that this is episode 2. That we don't have that. Unfortunately.
But yeah, so this is a blast. John, thanks for joining me again
Thank
this
you,
week.
Murph, for the questions and the purport. I'm not even going to try and finish that. Yep, thank you.
Yeah, I enjoy this. I hope we're all having fun here.
Yeah.
This is I actually did learn a lot today.
I'm glad.
So I'm hoping to retain this.
If not, I'm sure we'll circle back. It's like a
we'll
snake
touch
eating its own
base on
tail.
I'm probably gonna end up watching these again later, just to every Tuesday I'll watch the episode before just to make sure I don't ask the same fucking questions again.
That's probably smart.
So everything else can pretty much probably be covered off screen. So thank you everybody for joining us today.
Thanks. Yeah.
If you ever have any suggestions, comments, concerns, feel free to contact us at any of the ways that I told you about. We will be back again next week between 8 and 9 p.m. on Wednesday.
Eastern Central.
Every Wednesday, as long as we are available for it.
Yes.
Eastern Standard Time.
Eastern Central Mountain Time.
Yeah, okay. Or Ukrainian Battle Time is
Yes.
what we're at right now.
Absolutely.
Supporting. So, thank you for being here. John, thanks again for having us. Troy, if you can see me in the background, hi. Thank you for being the background. Thank you,
That's not
Minecraft
Troy.
Cave,
That's a blue
for
screen.
doing Minecraft Cave things. We'll see you next week again.
Alrighty. Bye.
Bye.